You're okay to. Hello, everyone, and happy World Refugee Day. To observe this day and the struggles of the forcibly displaced people, we have organized a two-part webinar series. Today is the second and the final panel of that webinar, where we will be talking about the pivotal role that the media can play in influencing international aid and humanitarian assistance during conflict and war. My name is Priyali Sur. I'm the founder of the Azadi Project, an organization that works to bring attention to forcibly displaced people, and it also builds safe spaces for women. We worked with women and youth from some of the most conflict-affected regions in the global south. Today, it gives me great pleasure to say that we have a diverse set of speakers joining us. We have voices from Gaza, Sudan, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. Motasim Dalal, who's a Gazan journalist, is joining us from Gaza City. He's taking a big risk to be part of this panel. He's personally suffered during this ongoing war in Gaza. Khalid Albay is a Sudanese artist and political cartoonist who's joining us today from Doha. Joshua Walker, who's the director of programs in the Congo Research Group at New York University, is joining us from New York. And obviously, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our moderator, Anjana Sankar. Anjana is an Indian journalist currently at the New York Times and is based in New York. She specializes in human rights reporting with over 15 years of experience. She focuses on global conflicts, migration, and disasters, including the Rohingya crisis and conflicts in Syria and Yemen. Her coverage extends to significant events such as the Israel-UAE peace deal, as well as the major natural disasters like the 2018 Kerala floods and the 2015 Nepal earthquake. Anjana, I'm going to hand it over to you, and we're really looking forward to this discussion.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us from all over the world. Good evening, good morning, depends on wherever you're from. And it's an honor to host this very important discussion on a day when we are observing the World Refugee Day. And I'm joined, I would like to quickly introduce our speakers, a diverse range of speakers who have joined us. And Priyali, thank you for the introduction and thank you for the Azadi Project for organizing this. So Motasim Ahmad Dalul, he's joining us from Gaza. Thank you so much, Motasim. We hope you stay safe. We understand the challenges you and other journalists are facing to tell this important story. So we are very honored that you are here. Motasim's articles in Middle East Monitor illuminate the politics behind Gaza's humanitarian crisis and the challenges its people face. And our second guest is Khalid. Khalid is a prominent Sudanese political cartoonist, and he's, his work in highlighting the freedom of expression around the world, commenting on subjects such as immigration, race, power, and conflict has made him one of the very prominent names or figures in Sudan. Thank you, Khalid, for joining us. And we are very eager to hear from you about Sudan and the particular challenges the country faces as it is in a raging conflict. And my third guest today is Joshua Z. Walker. Joshua, welcome to this important discussion. And Joshua, as Priyali said, is the director of Congo Research Center at New York University Center on International Cooperation. His research focuses on politics, economy, and culture of DRC, bridging academic knowledge and policy making. Joshua, thank you so much for being here. I think it's very important that we hear about a conflict which is grossly underreported. So looking forward to hearing your insights. So, I would like to open this discussion with a story that all of us are familiar with. That is about how in 2015, the listless body of a 3-year-old child, Aylan Kurdi, washed up on a Turkish beach. And that searing image has kind of set the tone of a crisis, of a conflict that has been going on for years, and the refugee flow from Europe. But that picture taken by a Turkish photojournalist kind of galvanized public opinion and policy on how governments, organizations, and individuals look at the Syrian refugee crisis. That is just one example of how media has the power and the influence to influence our narratives, to build, or it can break narratives when it comes to global conflicts happening thousands of miles away, connecting people to the humanitarian crisis and the sufferings of people. So on that note, I would like to open this discussion and ask, starting with Mossam. Motasam, first of all, we understand that you're talking to us from Gaza. And as you just mentioned before we started, that you could hear the sound of gunfire happening in the background. That's the kind of challenges, like every day when you're reporting on a war, where the front lines are your own home, the schools that your kids go to, maybe the aid centers where people queue up. So the front lines are everywhere, and you are very much reporting from a conflict which is you are part of. So can you tell us the way Gazan journalists, an army of them, have come forward to report on this crisis, and one of the worst humanitarian crises, which the UN said? How do you think that has influenced the way global narratives have been made around this war, and how people perceive what is happening in Gaza and the sufferings of people?
Thank you for hosting me. There are two things I'd like to speak about regarding reporting what's going on here in Gaza under the continuous brutal Israeli aggression on the Gaza Strip, which has been continuous for 258 days in a row. The Israeli firefighters haven't been absent from the skies of the Gaza Strip at all, and the Israeli drones and the sounds of gunfire and bombardment occurs every minute, and children and women and everyone here is afraid and is scared and waiting for himself to be the next target for these fire bombardments. And everyone is preparing himself to be a martyr, to be the next martyr. For me, as a journalist and as a father, I was asked by the Israeli occupation forces at the beginning of this aggression to leave my home and move southward, as they claim that the southern parts of the Gaza Strip is a safe zone, but a lot of people who moved there were killed there. And nowadays, the Israeli occupation forces are concentrating their attacks on the Gaza Strip, which designated as south as a safe zone. I didn't move because I wanted to continue covering the situation and what's going on here in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. Do you still hear me?
Yes, we do. Yes, Mutasam.
Because I insisted to stay here in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip in order to contribute in reporting and covering what's going on from to report firsthand reports and stories. I paid the tax for this. I lost my wife. I lost two children. My wife and my first children, I lost them on the 28th of March, and my second child, I lost him about 15 days ago. I lost them in different places. They were in refugee shelters, and refugee shelters were targeted. Most of journalists, local journalists, Palestinian journalists from Gaza moved southward. Only about 15 journalists who are from Gaza remained here in the northern part, where is about 700,000 people are still here in this part of the Gaza Strip. This number of journalists, about 15 journalists, is very few number, and all equipment, we lost all of our equipment, even protective vests. We don't have, or some of us have lost their vests, and can't, including me. I lost my vest in the bombardment of my house, and I have been unable to bring someone new. Under this condition, journalists consider themselves as fighters standing on a certain place. They have to cover their work, this side of work. They consider it as a kind of national duty, because the Israeli occupation has been banning or preventing international journalists from entering into the Gaza Strip. This is one point. The other point is the journalists who remained here are considered a legal target for the Israeli occupation forces. However, they didn't declare that journalists are legal targets for them, but their continuous and recurrent repeated targeting of the journalists in front of all the world, and no one has done anything for the Israeli occupation to stop this. It proves that they consider journalists as legal targets for them. Until now, since the start of this onslaught, 151 journalists have been killed. Most of them were directly targeted. And the journalists here in the northern part of the Gaza Strip, with whom I have contact every day, many of them have been targeted and survived being targeted by the Israeli occupation. So that continuous work, or to continue working and reporting from the northern part of the Gaza Strip, I think this is the same also in the southern parts of the Gaza Strip, is a very dangerous work. But as I have told you, the journalists here consider it as a national duty that they have to disclose the crimes, because when there is no reporting from the ground, the world will not know about these crimes, about the scale of these crimes.
Yeah, thank you, Mutassim. And we hear you. Our heart is with you. Deepest sympathies on the personal tragedies that you and many people are enduring in this conflict. You know, one of the things that makes the conflict in Gaza one of the most brutal is the lack of humanitarian aid and the difficulties aid agencies are facing to reach people who are in desperate needs. We are seeing reports of famine-like conditions, acute malnutrition among children, as various UN agencies have reported. So could you tell us, how do you think this reporting that is flooding into people's phones and tablets all across the world that your local journalists are doing from Gaza is influencing global aid response, humanitarian response to Gaza, despite the challenges where we know that, you know, hundreds of trucks are stuck at the border? But how do you think the reporting, the journalistic work you are doing is influencing the humanitarian response?
Reporting the condition of the famine here in Gaza and the severe lack of food moves the hearts of people everywhere around the globe. And I myself have received several requests to be or to deal with the people who want to donate or want to send money for food or to send food, but I refuse because I don't have time, and because I am dedicated to reporting and working journalistic work. but this makes people donate to and send food aid to the Gaza Strip. And this is, as you said, there are hundreds of truckloads of food, humanitarian aid stuck, stranded on the crossings. But the problem is that the Israeli occupation here doesn't disrespect all parties, all international bodies, all regional bodies, and insist on preventing the entry of the entry of food aid or enough food aid to the people here in Gaza, to the starving people here in Gaza. We have some food, but it is the minimum amount of food that keeps us alive. At these days, there is a huge lack of a shortage of food here in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip because the only 10 to 15 truckloads of humanitarian aid are allowed to enter into this part of the Gaza Strip for about 40 days. So that there is no vegetables, there is no fruit, there is no cereals, there is no milk, there is no meat, there is no food with the protein. There is nothing. We have only canned food, and this canned food also caused some diseases like hepatitis. Hepatitis spread here in among the people in Gaza, and all doctors and experts said that or referred this the reason for the widespread of hepatitis to two reasons. One of them, contamination of water and pollution, and the other is the repeated consumption of canned food. We have nothing except canned food. And at these days, we don't have canned food. We only have flour and bread without anything. The problem here, our reporting, we moved the people around the world. People donated, increased their donation. People increased their interest in sending humanitarian aid to the Gaza Strip, the poor people and the hungry, starving people in Gaza. But the problem was the Israeli occupation forces and the Israeli occupation authorities, which banned the entry of this food. The Israeli occupation army today posted a video, an aerial video for the hundreds of trucks of humanitarian aid on the crossing, claiming that they allowed them to enter into the Gaza, but the humanitarian, the human or the aid and food aid bodies and organizations are refusing to collect them. But the Israeli occupation is lying because, as you know, the Israeli occupation forces have so far killed more than 300 aid workers, including the staff of the World Kitchen Center. And this is the situation. It is very difficult.
Yeah, Mu'tasim, thank you for sharing your insights. We do understand. I think one of the reasons why this discussion is important is because, you know, we have people who can talk about a whole spectrum of how media coverage is influencing global humanitarian response. So as Mu'tasim said, we understand in Gaza, we all know that there has been a saturated, as some people say, media coverage of the humanitarian crisis there, though international journalists are not allowed, but the band of local journalists have been doing amazing work despite all the challenges. But when it comes to the humanitarian aid, there are unique challenges that people are facing. But when you come to the other two crises that we are talking about here, especially in Sudan and Congo, the question is about how much of lack of media reporting has influenced how people globally perceive these conflicts. So I'll move to Khalid to pose this question. Khalid, just before we address the media coverage of the crisis that has been raging in Sudan, more than 5 million people impacted, famine-like conditions there. There is some kind of reportage by the media, but not as much as what we have seen in Sudan, or as much as we have seen in Gaza or in Ukraine. But my question to you first is, if you could start by telling, we talk about media, we have this, conventional idea of what a media is, whether it's a television channel, whether it is social media reporting, but you represent a very unique band of media where it's about political cartoons, and that's a very powerful medium of telling whether it's political, social messages to reach people, like anybody beyond language, beyond barriers. People can understand the medium in which you communicate as a journalist. So can you tell us a little bit about how much of the work that you and other cartoonists in Sudan has had an impact globally or even regionally when it comes to depicting the scale of the disaster and the humanitarian crisis that Sudan is facing at the moment? Yes, please, Khalid.
Yeah. First of all, thank you for having me, and I'm honored to be alongside Matasim here, who's obviously one of the bravest people we all met, and I just wish we can help. In terms of Sudan has always been in the background, basically, of the international news, and that almost is always, I think, because of the way that people preserve Africa, including the media, because they think of Sudan as or Africa, or even the Middle East, as well as in Gaza. I would say that this is where usually the problems are. This is, of course, there's a war, of course there's a famine, of course there's all of these things, and this is preserved. This is like seen as the normal, and sadly, it's not. The interest of the news organizations now. It's what can go viral, is how many hits that it can get, or so. When talking about this news, you have to have some sort of a headline and a very short story, a very black and white story of why this is happening and how people understand that. And I think it was Noam Chomsky that said, who's not dead yet, thankfully, that said that news now is whatever you can fit between two ads, right? So it's basically that you have to tell your story super fast, and you have to tell it in a very simplistic way. These are the good guys, these are the bad guys, and this is what's happening. And this became the news, and Sudan is way more complicated than to put that in such short terms. They tried, of course. The tagline for the Sudan war was that, two generals fighting. But there's a lot in the background other than the two generals fighting. And this is what we have to go through. When we try to explain the issue of Sudan, we're told to speed it up, right? Like we don't have time. And cartooning, thankfully, is the medium for that. It's to simplify.
Khalid, can I just interrupt you for a second? Mutasim has to leave us now.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you so much, and stay safe, Mutasim. And we are so grateful that you could be on this conversation and share some very useful, important insights from ground zero. Thank you so much, and please stay safe.
Mutasim, thank you from the Azadi project. Also really grateful that you took the risk and did this. Please stay safe. We'll be in touch.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. Sorry, Khalid. Yes, let's continue.
No need to apologize at all. I mean,
Yes.
we
Yeah.
could have had the whole talk just with him, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You were
So
talking about the cartoonist.
Yeah. So cartooning is basically the medium for simplifying a situation. And this is kind of where the power of cartooning comes from, is that we shrink whatever issue that we're talking about into one panel, and then we talk about it. However, now I think, you know, for me, as a cartoonist, the way I see things now, especially in Sudan or in Gaza or in Congo, or that it's, you know, the whole news became cartoons, you know, so we don't really stand out. You know, everything became shrinking the news into something that's digestible for like an 8-year-old, you know,
Like the
forgetting
memes.
about the nuance of things and forgetting about how complicated things are and the historical context of things, which is very important. But sadly, this is what we have to go through. So for me and other cartoonists in Sudan, thankfully, I'm very privileged. That you know, I live outside and outside of Sudan, and I had the means to, with the support of, you know, organizations like the IMS, International Media Support, and other organizations, that I could start an online magazine called Khartoon Magazine. And Khartoon Magazine is what I try to do to help my fellow cartoonists, to keep them working, because I have a following. A lot of people see my work. Most of my work is in English because this is what I'm trying to get to people, to get to organizations, to news organizations, to get international news organizations' attentions of what's happening in Sudan. So I wanted to think about a solution to get other people as well, and to share their work. So we started this magazine, and now, you know, most of the cartoonists, of course, are displaced internally and internationally in Sudan. They don't have their equipment. We lost the Sudanese cartoon archive, actually, that had the history of the Sudanese cartoon during this war. Because of, you know, one of the soldiers stole the hard disk where, you know, that we had all the cartoons stored. So it's a very tough situation. It's incredibly complicated to try to tell the Sudanese story in a way that is not simplified.
I want to throw this question to Joshua. Last but not the least, thank you, Joshua. You know, as Khalid said, media often tends to highlight stories which are easy to elaborate, you know, culturally not that complex for their global audience. And, you know, I read somewhere in a report that said every time the New York Times writes about a disaster in a foreign country, it is equivalent to almost 500,000 in foreign aid. That's the kind of impact international media has. But, you know, most of these conflicts that we currently face, one thing that has put the spotlight is the importance of local media, especially in Gaza and, you know, other countries where lack of resources and other reasons have forced international media not to invest enough resources in these conflicts, in covering these conflicts. But as I said, to galvanize global opinion, which would in turn turn into policy initiatives at government levels and also humanitarian aid response, international media coverage is so crucial. And while talking about Congo, the conflict that is happening there is a gaping hole that is one of the most underreported disasters. How do you look at it, and what are the challenges specifically that you think the global humanitarian or the aid institutions face when it comes to getting that message across to the world, to their donor community, when there is a zero or minimal media coverage on this particular conflict?
Thank you so much. And I also wanted to say that it's really an honor to be with such esteemed people on this panel. I wanted to sort of touch a little bit also on what Ali said, just because I think that equally one of the big challenges for the DRC and reporting on the DRC conflict and the particular kind of configuration of the international media landscape is precisely the complexity of the conflict. We talk about the Congo conflict, but in fact, there are sort of numerous interlinked conflicts that are occurring in different parts of the Eastern Congo. And so it really doesn't lend itself to easy, simple narratives. You couple that with the fact that the various conflicts in the Eastern Congo have been going on almost 30 years now, emerging out of the aftermath of the Rwandan genocide and the toppling of the former dictator Mobutu. And so it's also been going on for quite a long time. And I think that contributes to this sense that, well, this is just a place that is like this endemically, or this is just a place that, sort of has been like this, will continue to be like this. And there's no reason for me, sort of Western or American media consumer, to care. I think coupled with that, though, and this is a specific challenge I've noticed with the Congo, is that we do see a huge disparity in terms of media coverage between Francophone and Anglophone media. So, it may be that the Congo is very underreported, but in the Francophone world, I would say it is not really. So outlets like France 24, Radio France International, they have correspondents based in the DRC. They are regularly publishing articles on the DRC in ways that you just don't see quite as much when it comes to outlets like the BBC or certainly CNN or Al Jazeera. And I think that's partly due to historical reasons. Obviously, the Democratic Republic of the Congo was previously a Belgian colony. There have long been French interests in the DRC, and it's considered to be the largest French-speaking country in the world by population. So there's a natural French Francophone interest there that we don't see with the English-speaking media. What I will say, though, just anecdotally, is that, again, going back to this question of how do you provide a simplistic narrative? I mean, so one of the rare occasions when we have seen quite widespread coverage of the DRC in the United States was just a few weeks ago when there was a botched coup attempted by a Congolese American that included some other American citizens. And so instantly, we were getting calls from media outlets like NBC, which pretty much never happens in our work, saying, can you comment on this story? And that was because there was a very simplistic headline that read, Americans involved in coup attempt in Congo. But obviously, this doesn't always give you the opportunity to explain, this is really a marginal kind of story in the grand, broader story of the sort of unfolding humanitarian tragedy in the Eastern Congo. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Yeah, you're right, because there are various reasons why editorial decisions are made in terms of what story should be covered and how much it should be covered, and stories which are, as I mentioned, easy to be explained and in a cultural context to the readers, especially in the Western media, those stories. But I think we do have to mention that of several factors that dictates how media invests their resources in stories. I think clickbait journalism, followed by, widely by various media outlets, especially online, also plays a huge role, because every morning editorial decisions are made on what stories have gotten the most number of hits, which stories are read, where do you have the most number of engagements on social media, and those stories get replugged, those stories get promoted, those stories are written again. But I think one good thing that has come out of clickbait journalism or the social media is also how not just the conventional media, citizen journalism, or the kind of journalism or reporting that you see, whether it is through a picture or a meme or a cartoon on social media, also can influence public opinion, and so the humanitarian responses. How do you look at the role that social media plays in galvanizing humanitarian aid? Joshua, especially in the context of Congo.
I think that it's this is obviously something that's pretty difficult to quantify. But I think that, if we think about, aid is galvanized in my mind by when it comes to, just to take the example I'm most familiar with, the United States, aid partially can be galvanized through the activation or the creation of a domestic political constituency in the aid-giving country that sort of forces the government to act, right? And so we've seen, for example, in social media with regard to the Congo, lots of campaigns around so-called conflict minerals, meaning, the fact that coltan and other minerals that are crucial to the creation or to the building of, cell phones and things like that, and now cobalt and the sort of green energy revolution, which is, the cobalt majority of the world's cobalt reserves being in the Congo. We've seen attempts to kind of generate social media campaigns around things like this, where they can try to sort of directly connect American consumers with conflict as a way of trying to exert pressure. I would say that those things have been those campaigns have been somewhat successful, although they also generate sort of unintended consequences with regard to value chains and things like that. So, I mean, I think the challenge still remains actually that the ways in which you can create a domestic political constituency in Western countries through allyship with, organizations in the affected countries like the DRC that can then put pressure on those governments. And it's true that social media can be an effective tool in doing that. But it's, I don't think it's reached its full potential yet in terms of impact.
Okay. Thank you, Joshua. We are like almost halfway through the time allotted to us. As much as we spoke about the role of or the influence of media in humanitarian global aid, I think that also makes us sit and think about the responsibility of the media on, how much and what they should cover and how they should explain humanitarian crisis unfolding in different parts of the world. But on that note, I would like to open the floor for questions to our audience here. Please raise your hands, introduce yourself, and ask your questions. Please raise your hands, or you can type your questions here on the chat. Okay, there is a question from Deepshika Chattery. Deepshika wants to thank Azadi Project, and she has a question. Do you think the media has completely understood and properly represents the various conflicts, or there are still spaces where the media can better understand these conflicts? Khalid, do you want to take this question? Do you think the media has completely understood and properly represents various conflicts? You can speak from the Sudan experience.
I mean, I'm gonna speak from in general as well, is because being a cartoonist, I speak to a lot of cartoonists. I never worked for a newspaper before. I always worked on online. I was an independent political cartoonist most of my life, and I still am. So when I speak to cartoonists that work in newspapers that have to do something daily that their editor has to tell them that they have to do, sometimes they don't know what they're doing. Sometimes they have no grasp of the real situation, the real history. But as a cartoonist, you use what you use as a cartoonist, which is basically using, pop culture references, stereotypes, things like that, and into kind of simplifying the situation. This is the good guys, these are the bad guys, and that can get you in a lot of complicated situations and get you implicit actually in delivering the wrong message as well, because at the end of the day you're empowering these stereotypes, which could be really the view of your editor or the view of your newspaper. It's not generally right, and because at the end of the day, sadly, it's really what your news outlet is trying to say. Who owns this new outlet? Who is trying to say what, right? And if you are not well aware of the situation, then you will just reflect a very simplified version of what your boss is telling you to reflect. So obviously, yes, the simple answer is yes. You need to know, as a media worker, as a journalist, as a political cartoonist, whatever it is, someone with a voice, you need to know what you're talking about. Otherwise, you're part of the problem. And, the social media gave us a solution, which is, yes, it gave people like me a platform to be independent, but it also gave a lot of people who don't know what they're talking about a platform to be independent. And Twitter, for example, or X now, or whatever, is used to have at least some sort of a verification into, oh, this is a journalist, this is someone that maybe we should trust, and so on. Right now, you can buy that. You can literally buy that blue tick on Twitter, and everything you say is pumped up, and this becomes the message. Troll farms, so on. So it's really depends on how much money you have, and this is how the message gets through. So for independent voices like me, I have to struggle to really make people understand what is the issue that we're talking about at hand, whether it's Sudan, or whether it's Gaza, or whether it's the relationship between Sudan and Gaza, or whether it's the relationship between Sudan and Gaza and Congo, because that is also used right now, because they say, oh, you're always talking about, especially by Zionists, right? Like, they're like, oh, you're always talking about Gaza, this is anti-Semitism, why don't you talk about Sudan and Congo? Because the simplified version of the issue in Sudan and Congo doesn't involve Israel, but it does, really, in a lot of ways. So the nuance are missing. I don't know if that answers the question, but
Yeah, there's one more question you may want to take, Khalid. This is Chaiti Sarkar. Her question is, in what terms activism, I think we can interpret activism, whether it is social media activism or otherwise, has it been in any way effective in representing what is happening in Sudan?
Sudan right now, and for the last 5 years, since the revolution happened in 2019, is basically ran by activists on the ground. Hospitals are run by activists. Hospitals are run by volunteer doctors. No one is paying these doctors. The whole government is the governing of each neighborhood or each area in Sudan is run by activists. They're called what's the name in English? The revolutionary committees, right? And or neighborhood committees. This is basically what runs every neighborhood in terms of transport, in terms of food, in terms of hospitals. The whole country is run by activists. Because we didn't have a government, we tried to have a government in 2019, and that was it was supported in many ways by the Europeans, for example, of course, because they're scared of what is happening now, which will lead to refugee crisis, which mostly the refugees will go to Europe, right? But it wasn't supported by America and Trump at the time, which led to the situation that we're in now, which they supported, the people with the guns. They didn't support these activists on the ground, and they didn't support the people who are fighting for democracy.
Yeah. Joshua, I would like to throw this question to you. Like, the global aid needs, according to the UN in 2023, is $57 billion. And out of that, 35 billion is in unmet appeals, and these are mostly from underreported crises. And I'm sure Sudan, Congo all fall under that list. What do you think media can do differently in terms of influencing global humanitarian response, especially in Congo? What would you like to see differently?
Thank you. That's a very interesting and challenging question. I mean, I think that, I was thinking before this panel that there's a real question about the extent to which the media responds to a pre-existing demand for particular kinds of stories, and the extent to which media has the responsibility to, in a sense, generate the demand for those stories by reporting on them, precisely because, as you say, these are underreported conflicts. And so I think that, the challenge is to report on conflicts like Congo or like Sudan in ways that can both mobilize through, for lack of a better term, through the way that they shock and sort of cause a certain degree of moral outrage, I would say, but without necessarily relying on those kind of simplistic tropes and stereotypes. I think that to go back to the question about to what extent do reporters really understand what they're reporting about? I mean, this is obviously debatable, but I would say that to understand a conflict like the Congo in great detail, and with all the nuances that it has, and I would imagine the same as for Sudan, it requires people who've had a very long-term commitment to reporting on and in the country. And it's obviously not something you see too much in the kind of global conflict reporting or international reporting landscape where people spend a few years in one place and move on to the next. And so I think that might be, I realize there are other forces at play that determine that kind of movement, but finding really deeply engaged people who've spent a lot of time trying to understand one particular place, I think is a good starting point for trying to convey the importance of a conflict and its consequences, but without immediately relying on stereotypes and sort of tired tropes.
Yeah. I think there's another question to you, Joshua. As a researcher, maybe you could shed some light on this. This is from Andre Vincent. He's a political science student who's writing a paper on disparity between the coverage and the youth-driven mass movements to address the situation in Palestine compared to conflicts and humanitarian crisis in Sudan, Congo. So his question is, he says, much of what he finds in terms of research papers focuses on the prehistory of these conflicts, but little or to no recent articles about on African perspectives on how they would like to see this conflict addresses. So as a researcher, do you think, mass media reaches more people, but when it comes to nuanced coverage or explaining what the crisis is from the current context and from the voices from the ground, what role do you think researchers can play when it comes to explaining the conflict and its scale in Congo?
Thank you. So first of all, I would say, I see that the question specifically asked about English language research. And particularly when it comes to local voices, at least from the Congo, that's extremely limited, precisely because it's in English. There is quite a bit of content that's produced by local voices in French about the Congo that isn't translated. And so that's kind of the first starting point. I would say, though, that in terms of getting, not to maybe plug a little bit of our work, but the Congo Research Group where I work, we do almost everything in tandem with a Congolese research institute called Ebuteli. And we publish together things like blog posts and reports, much of which, our Ebuteli colleagues, are driving a lot of the analysis about what's happening in the Congo politically and in terms of the security situation. And so, that's one place, for instance, where a Congolese perspective can be seen. But as I mentioned, these sources are almost always only in French.
Yeah, thank you. And, another question that one of our audience, Tanya Srivastava, has asked about how independent journalists who are reporting on both sides, both on social media and otherwise, can be held accountable and responsible for the kind of reporting that they do. Khalid and Joshua, both of you can take this question, which I think I want to frame this question differently and ask, we spoke about the coverage of media, how much do they cover and how do they cover dictating humanitarian global response. But equally important is also that we address how misinformation or distorted coverage can also hamper certain narratives and perspectives about a particular conflict. So what can you talk about a little bit about accountability when it comes to whether it is mainstream media or independent journalists reporting on social media and other platforms can have when it comes to their reporting of these disasters and humanitarian crisis in especially in a distant world?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think one of the best things that happened on Twitter was the community notes, and having the community notes under each tweet where the community will actually agree or disagree with you or give more information about whatever you wrote about. I think that really changed the way that you look at news. But again, it also comes back to who owns this, right? So, you know, Elon Musk fired a guy from Twitter for opposing him. It's basically the same dictatorship again, and you know, the same goes for international media outlets, right? Because, you know, I think authoritarian regimes and have kind of figured out the game of spreading news and spreading misinformation. Because, for example, before it used to be an anonymous name on the WhatsApp group that will just you know, send an article around, and then this will be shared around, and this would be the source of the news. But now, because people are becoming more media savvy, and you know, even the your aunties on WhatsApp now can learn that they need to research what they're sharing. That became another layer that they have to cover. So for Sudan, imagine there was the UAE has funded, the UAE and Israel actually have funded a troll farm that contained hundreds of names of fake accounts of Sudanese, let's say journalists or graduates or whatever they write on their bio. But not only that, they copy pasted websites that looked like news websites. And these websites contain fake articles written by AI with photos of journalists. These photos are made by AI. You go onto if you want to research the actual journalist who is actually absolutely made up, you can go to their own website, and then you'll find 4 articles written by them, right? So to cover their tracks, they have made like a very complicated web of disinformation that you need to follow, right? And there's loads of research on that. There's a guy called Mark Owen that did a lot of research on that on Twitter. You can look it up. But it's not that they just only now just, you know, publish an article or a photo or whatever it is and just see where it goes. No, they actually made websites for them to follow up on that. And again, we come back to the situation where independent journalists on the ground don't have the capacity to be pushed on top of like the, you know, the Google searches or the Twitters or whatever, and you just get diluted into this mess of and web of mis and disinformation. So we're really facing a very hard times when it comes to trying to be a journalist in this time. And if you don't have already people that you trust and people who are independent and so on, it's very tough to know what's right and what's wrong again. And you have to be very tech savvy. You have to understand and have the time, and not only have the time, but also care, right? And yeah, so yeah.
Yeah, Khalid, just because we are short on time, I want to take a few more questions, more questions as possible. We have Michelle Sicard who's raised hands. Michelle, are you here? Can you please ask your question? Yeah, thank you, Michelle.
Good morning. Thank you to you both and the Azadi Project for this seminar. My name is Michelle. I study at the School of Advanced International Studies with Hopkins, and I'm currently working in journalism at America's Quarterly. So focusing on the Americas, but I see that there's similarities between these conflicts and conflicts happening in the Americas in relation to the US's attention and consumers' and lack of attention to humanitarian issues in general. What do you think that journalism is missing, or what do you think that we as journalists can do to kind of grab, I know this is a very big question, but to kind of grab, I don't know, the attention, or what is missing, I guess, in helping with the lack of attention, especially for Western consumers of media?
Joshua,
can I take this one?
Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you. So I think one of the things that journalism can be doing is explain, you know, when it got to at least speak of the Congolese case, right? In as much as you know, the US is trying to do certain things in the Congo right now that are perhaps good initiatives, there is a certain amount of responsibility that the US bears for the Congo being in the situation that it's in today. But it's not always so immediately apparent, right? And this is the thing. If you think about the protests on university campuses in the United States, a lot of that was driven by the very obvious direct link between the United States and Israel and the consequences of the war in Gaza, right? But the United States also has, in this American case, also has some responsibility for, say, the propping up of the dictator Mobutu in Congo, which was previously Zaire for many decades, which sort of created a particular political set of arrangements that led to war. And anyway, there's a long story there, right? And so I think reminding readers or viewers of the fact that this is not something that sort of happened on its own, but we are actually also part of this would be a good first start. And that happens, I think, quite rarely in reporting on the Congo, at least.
Thank you, Michelle. We have one more question from Anshuman. Anshuman Chowdhury, he's a New Delhi-based researcher. He's asking about the role of language when it comes to conflict reporting. And he's using a specific example of how many media uses the term divergent use of dead versus killed in the context of Gaza. His question is this a deep-rooted systemic problem in legacy media, or these are just casual editorial lapses? Yeah, I think we can take the similar examples to various conflict reporting where the certain framing of the language influences how people perceive it. It may, as he said, it may look like one small tweak of a word of killed or dead. Joshua, can you just tell us, how do you look at when this kind of reporting or the tweaking of words could influence how people perceive a conflict?
Well, I think it's important. I'm trying to think now if reporting on the Congo in English. I think that I'm not sure whether they use those kinds of tweaks occur or for what reason they do. But I would say that to take the case of dead versus killed, obviously the nuance is about causality, and the nuance is about saying that dead is a kind of passive term that doesn't really attribute responsibility. And so to that extent, I think that, reporting in Congo or on the Congo, I should say, needs to reflect that nuance. I think it often does, though, but I think the nuance perhaps with the Gaza conflict, right, is that in the Congo, you have multiple different armed groups, some of them backed by foreign countries like Rwanda or Burundi that are operating. And so using the word, these people were killed by this armed group, does not have the same kind of political charge that it does, that would cause an editor to say, at the New York Times, for instance, to speak about dead in the Gaza conflict versus people killed in the Gaza conflict.
Thank you. Ian, would you like to ask your question? Sorry, I kept you waiting for long.
Totally fine. Thank you very much. My name is Ian. I'm a current, I study security matters, so I'm a bit new to this sort of domain, humanitarian aid, this sort of thing. But my main question deals with the rise of private, non-media aligned citizens doing open source intelligence accounts on social media, particularly around conflicts such as those that are unfolding in Sudan, as well as Gaza and Congo, as well as Ukraine, as well as there's been a huge amount of coverage on that. Do these serve to help aid and citizens on the ground with conflicts such as those you cover, or those that you are very much experts in, or do they serve to fragment the conflict or create a barrier for citizens to actively engage or try to have more awareness about these conflicts? Thank you very much for your input throughout this entire webinar.
Khalid, would you like to take the question?
Sure, yeah. Especially in Sudan, people are hungry for knowledge, right? People are hungry for information because there's a acute lack of information coming out of Sudan. And that could be filled by anything. These accounts are, you have to again, think about the political context. Who are these people? Do you figure out if they're real or not? Who are they working for? All of these things until you kind of figure out what they're saying. So there has to be a lot of verifying going on, and in a lot of times they at the beginning of the Sudanese conflict, for example, there was a young girl that showed up online, and she just started doing like satellite images of where bombings happened or where things like that happened. And she I think she said she's Ukrainian, and this went on for like a good 3-4 months, and her account grew very fast, and she was quoted in a lot of articles and so on, and suddenly disappeared. When people started talking to her about who is she, how is she doing this, where is she getting this information from, she said she's crowdsourcing their information. So we don't know, we really don't know. And these people are filling a vacuum, really, and it really just shows how much we need real journalism and real journalists to step in and take their role. Like, not everything has to be politically backed, right? We need independent journalism, and this is how journalism should be.
Joshua, it's almost time, but your last word on this.
Well, I would just say that echoing a little bit what Khalid said now and previously. I mean, I think that there's things like the community notes function and the possibility through social media to do sort of good critique of bad coverage is extremely important, but it always comes with the danger that if you don't know exactly who the person is and what their alliances or affiliations are, then people can be misled. And so there's a sort of double-edged sword, I think, what's been opened up by social media. And on the one hand, we lose a little bit the sort of authority of curated journalism that comes with, under the banner of big name outlets. But at the same time, we recognize that there are problems within those big name outlets. And so it's a conundrum. And I think raising people's awareness of this conundrum and of this challenge is something that is important to do moving forward.
Yeah, our time is almost up. This is a subject where we can talk for hours, and thank you so much for the audience who asked questions. We do still have plenty of questions that people have asked. Please, we have noted down your questions, and those questions are not ignored because these are important questions to be asked and answered. But in conclusion, as a journalist who has reported on conflicts and humanitarian crisis, I am glad that whether it's the conventional media or social or reporting and journalism that we see on social media is coming under the scanner like never before. And I think that is a good step where these kind of thought-provoking discussions would force media outlets or journalists out there to self-reflect and to look at their coverage, and their readers, their audiences are making them feel accountable to their coverage. Every story that they put out is being put under a scanner, and audiences are discussing the coverage. So I think that kind of accountability or responsibility that media is made to self-reflect on their coverage would do a huge favor when it comes to their future reporting on humanitarian crisis. And we are staring at a world where I think there's the most number of protracted conflicts happening in the world, and raging humanitarian crisis that is going from bad to worse. So I hope, as a journalist, my hope is that any kind of media coverage will keep humanity, will have a humanitarian heart in their reporting, and believe that all lives are equal and all lives are equally valuable. And I hope that approach would lead media outlets to not to differentiate between crisis and disasters happening in different parts of the world. And on that note, thank you, all of you, for adding value to this discussion. And Priyali from the Azadi project, thank you so much for hosting this very important discussion on a day when we know millions of people are being displaced due to different humanitarian crises and conflicts from around the world.
Angela, thanks for so excellently moderating this discussion. Khalid, Joshua, thank you so much for joining us. And just another mention of Motasim, who was so brave to join us and share his perspective. To all the audience who were so engaged and participating enthusiastically in this discussion, feel free to reach out to us at any point if you need to know more or need to connect with any of our speakers or the moderator. We'll also be putting up this discussion on YouTube next week, so you can feel free to go back to this discussion and note your most important point. Thank you once again, everybody, and happy World Refugee Day.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.